A wedding, the ultimate promise, a sacred bond, uniting two hearts with vows of eternal loyalty, devotion, and love. For Michael and Julia, their wedding day was no exception. On a crisp spring afternoon, they stood hand in hand beneath an arch of delicate white roses, their eyes locked, their smiles unshakable. It was the kind of love story others envied, the kind that inspired hope. Guests wiped tears of joy as they exchanged their vows, and the air was filled with laughter, music, and dreams of a perfect future. If you are not an advocate of domestic violence, murder, workplace harassment, child abuse, infidelity, to mention a few, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more true crime stories. Thank you. But perfection is often a mask. Beneath its surface, cracks can form, hidden fractures that only reveal themselves when it's too late to turn back. For Michael and Julia, those cracks were invisible on that blissful day. The photos captured joy. The toasts spoke of forever, and the world saw only a couple destined for happiness. But just weeks later, that picture-perfect romance would transform into a nightmare no one could have imagined. In the early hours of a seemingly ordinary weekday, police cars swarmed a suburban neighborhood. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, their faces pale with fear, as officers entered a home that had once been filled with newlywed laughter and love. What they found inside was nothing short of horrifying. Bloodstains told a story of rage. The shattered silence of a quiet home spoke of betrayal. And in the middle of it all stood Michael, a man whose world had just collapsed. How does a love story so radiant spiral into a tragedy so dark? What secrets lay hidden behind closed doors, waiting to destroy everything in their path? And what could possibly drive a husband, just weeks into his marriage, to pull the trigger? Not once, but twice, leaving behind a scene of unspeakable violence. We unravel a story that begins with love, but ends with unimaginable loss. A story of passion, deceit, and betrayal. A perfect life unraveled by a secret so dangerous, it turned one man into both victim and perpetrator. As we dive into this case, you'll hear how an ordinary morning spiraled into chaos, how a hidden affair tore apart more than just a marriage, and how a single moment of fury left two lives extinguished and a community stunned. What happened in that house wasn't just a crime, it was the collision of trust, desire, and destruction. This is the story of Michael, the husband who stumbled upon a devastating truth. It's the story of Julia, the newlywed with secrets she couldn't contain. And it's the story of a moment when everything came undone in the most tragic way possible. Stay with us as we dive into every chilling detail, every question that begs an answer, and every twist that will leave you questioning how well you really know the people you love. If you are not an advocate of domestic violence, murder, workplace harassment, child abuse, to mention a few, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more true crime stories. Thank you. It's a sunny afternoon in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where life moves at an easy pace. Tree-lined streets are dotted with neatly trimmed lawns, children's bicycles rest against white picket fences, and the distant hum of a lawnmower fills the air. On one of these peaceful streets, in a modest but beautiful two-story home, Michael and Julia are settling into their lives as newlyweds. The pair had only been married for a few weeks, but to those around them, they seemed to embody the perfect union. Michael, a successful real estate agent in his early 30s, was the kind of man others looked up to. Charismatic and hard-working, he had built a reputation for integrity and ambition. His colleagues admired him, his clients trusted him, and his friends spoke of him with pride. Julia, just a few years younger, was the social butterfly of her circle. With her warm smile and infectious laughter, she charmed everyone she met. Friends described her as the life of any gathering, a woman who made others feel seen and valued. She was adored by her family, respected by her peers, and to Michael she was nothing short of a dream come true. The couple's romance was like something out of a movie. They met by chance at a mutual friend's party less than a year ago. Michael had been immediately captivated by Julia's energy, while Julia couldn't resist Michael's charm and quiet confidence. Sparks flew, and before long their relationship became the kind that inspired envy, a whirlwind courtship filled with romantic getaways, shared dreams, and promises of forever. The wedding itself was the stuff of fairy tales. Set in a picturesque vineyard, it was a day filled with laughter, dancing, and love. Julia, radiant in her lace gown, was the picture of happiness. Michael, dapper in his tailored suit, beamed with pride as he watched his bride walk down the aisle. They exchanged vows beneath a canopy of twinkling lights, surrounded by friends and family who believed they were witnessing the beginning of a beautiful forever. But every story, no matter how perfect it seems, has layers beneath the surface, and while Michael and Julia's marriage appeared flawless to the outside world, it was anything but. There was another character in this story, Lisa Harris, Julia's friend from college. Lisa wasn't someone Michael knew well. She existed in the periphery of their lives, someone Julia occasionally mentioned but rarely brought around. Lisa, however, wasn't just a casual friend. She had been a quiet but consistent presence in Julia's life, a shadow lurking behind the scenes of their relationship. To Julia, Lisa was more than a confidant. She was a secret Julia had carefully hidden from Michael since the day they met. The details of their connection were buried in late-night phone calls, stolen moments, and whispered words that no one else was meant to hear. As Michael and Julia settled into their marriage, their routine began to take shape. Mornings started with coffee and quiet conversations. Evenings were spent planning for the future. But behind Julia's easy laughter and Michael's steady devotion, something was brewing. A tension that neither of them dared to name but both could feel. Michael, ever perceptive, began to notice small cracks in the foundation of their relationship. Julia's phone seemed to buzz more often than usual, and she was always quick to dismiss his questions with a reassuring smile. Her absences grew more frequent, errands that took longer than they should, unexplained work commitments that didn't quite add up. Michael brushed off his concerns at first, chalking it up to the growing pains of married life. But as the weeks passed, the unease gnawed at him. For Julia, the weight of her secret began to take its toll. She loved Michael, or at least she thought she did. But Lisa had been part of her life long before Michael entered the picture. Their connection was complex, emotional, and, above all, forbidden. Julia knew she couldn't keep both relationships intact forever, but she wasn't ready to let go of either. And so the stage was set. A quiet suburban home, a devoted husband growing suspicious, a wife torn between two worlds, and a lover waiting in the wings, her presence a spark in a powder keg of emotions. Beneath the surface of their idyllic life, secrets simmered, each one hotter than the last. And soon, those secrets would boil over, leaving behind a trail of destruction no one could have foreseen. If you are not an advocate of domestic violence, murder, workplace harassment, child abuse to mention a few, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more true crime stories. Thank you. As the weeks passed, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. At first, it was the little things most people would dismiss. Julia had started to act differently. Her phone, once left casually on the kitchen counter or the nightstand, was now always in her pocket or face down on the table. She seemed jumpy when it buzzed, brushing off his questions with a quick, "Oh, just work stuff," or "It's nothing important." But it wasn't nothing. Michael could feel it. The late-night phone calls were the first major sign. Julia would step out of the room, lowering her voice as she spoke in hushed tones. When Michael asked who it was, her answers felt rehearsed. "Just Lisa," she'd say with a quick smile. "She's going through something, and I'm just trying to be there for her." Michael wanted to believe her. Lisa was one of Julia's closest friends, after all. But the excuses became more frequent. Julia began working late more often, and her explanations grew vaguer. "Deadlines," she'd mutter. "You know how it is." Michael nodded, but doubt had already taken root in his mind. Then came the absences, errands that dragged on for hours, plans that didn't add up. One night, Michael found himself pacing their living room, staring at the clock as Julia's promised quick run to the store stretched into 2 hours. When she finally came home, she looked flustered, her cheeks flushed and her shirt slightly rumpled. "What took so long?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "The line at the store was ridiculous," she replied without meeting his eyes. Michael nodded. but the unease inside him swelled. He started paying closer attention, noticing details he hadn't before. The faint scent of perfume on Julia's clothes, one that wasn't hers, the way she avoided eye contact when he asked about her day. And then there were the receipts. Dinner for two at a restaurant they hadn't been to together, hotel bookings that didn't match her work schedule. Still, Michael held back. He wanted to believe that it was all in his head, that he was being paranoid. But the doubt gnawed at him, keeping him awake at night. It wasn't until one fateful afternoon that his suspicions would be confirmed in the most devastating way imaginable. That day, Michael had planned to work late at the office, finalizing a big deal that could secure his promotion. But an unexpected cancellation gave him the chance to head home early, a rare treat he was eager to share with Julia. He pictured her surprise, imagined the two of them enjoying a quiet evening together, maybe even reconnecting after the tension of the past few weeks. As he pulled into the driveway, something struck him as odd. Julia's car was parked out front, but the house was unusually quiet. No music playing, no TV on, no sound of her humming as she cooked dinner. Michael stepped out of his car, his heart beating just a little faster than usual. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. "Julia?" he called out, his voice echoing in the stillness. There was no response. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy he couldn't quite place. As he walked through the house, his footsteps seemed louder than normal. He passed the living room, where the faint scent of perfume lingered in the air, a scent that didn't belong to Julia. His chest tightened as he approached the bedroom. The door was slightly ajar, and muffled voices filtered through the crack. Michael stopped in his tracks, his mind racing. He told himself it could be nothing, a phone call maybe, or Julia talking to a friend. But deep down he knew. He had known for weeks. Pushing the door open, Michael was met with a sight that would forever be burned into his memory. Julia was there, tangled in the sheets with someone else. And that someone else was Lisa, the woman he had trusted as Julia's friend, the woman whose name had been the answer to every suspicious question he'd asked. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The air left Michael's lungs, and his vision blurred. Julia gasped, pulling the sheets around her, while Lisa scrambled to cover herself. "Michael," Julia started, her voice shaking, but he didn't let her finish. He didn't yell, he didn't cry, he didn't say a word. Instead, he turned and walked out of the room, his movements eerily calm. As he headed down the hallway, his mind raced with emotions he couldn't fully process. Betrayal, rage, heartbreak, disbelief. In the living room, Michael opened the drawer of the small table by the couch and pulled out the handgun he kept for protection. He turned it over in his hands, the weight of it both grounding and terrifying. And then, he turned and walked back toward the bedroom, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Julia's voice trembled as she called out to him. "Michael, wait, please, we can talk about this." But Michael didn't respond. He crossed the threshold of the bedroom, his expression unreadable. And then, without a word, he raised the gun. Michael stood at the bedroom door, his hands trembling as he held the gun, yet his face betrayed no emotion. Julia and Lisa were frozen in place, their faces pale, their breaths shallow. Time seemed suspended in the weight of that moment. "Michael, put the gun down," Julia pleaded, her voice cracking. But her words did little to calm him. The betrayal he had just witnessed replayed in his mind, over and over, like a broken reel he couldn't turn off. Lisa tried to speak next, her voice soft but strained. "Michael, this isn't what it looks like. Let's just talk." But those words, the words he'd heard in so many movies and TV shows, felt hollow, mocking even. Something inside Michael snapped, a primal part of him taking over, drowning out logic, reason, and restraint. The first shot rang out like a thunderclap in the still afternoon air. Julia screamed, but it was cut short as the bullet struck her. The force knocked her backward onto the bed, blood staining the pristine white sheets that had once symbolized their fresh start. Lisa screamed, scrambling to shield herself, but Michael's rage was unrelenting. Another shot fired, hitting Lisa as she tried to crawl away. Her body slumped against the nightstand, blood pooling beneath her. The echoes of the gunshots faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Michael stood there, the gun still in his hand, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. The room, once a sanctuary of intimacy and love, was now a scene of chaos and death. The weight of what he had done began to settle in. But the silence didn't last. Outside, neighbors had heard the gunshots. In a quiet suburb where such sounds were rare, panic spread like wildfire. Curtains were pulled back, doors cautiously opened, and within minutes, someone had dialed 911. "We heard gunshots," a neighbor later recounted to reporters. "It was so loud it sounded like it came from right next door. My wife and I hit the floor, terrified. Then we heard screaming, and then nothing." Another neighbor described seeing Michael moments after the shots were fired. "I looked out the window and saw him standing in the doorway of his house holding a gun. He just stood there staring at nothing. It was like he was in a trance." Inside the house, Michael remained motionless for what felt like an eternity. The adrenaline that had fueled his actions was beginning to wear off, replaced by a cold, numbing realization. The people he had once cared for, his wife, and the woman he now realized had been her lover, were gone, and he had been the one to end their lives. What drove Michael to this breaking point? Was it the shock of betrayal, the rage of humiliation, or something deeper, something darker, that had been building within him long before that fateful afternoon? Michael's next actions only deepened the mystery. Some might expect him to flee, to try to escape the consequences of his actions, but he didn't. Instead, he walked to the kitchen, placed the gun on the counter, and picked up the phone. When the dispatcher answered, Michael's voice was eerily calm. "I need the police," he said. "There's been a shooting." The operator asked for details, but Michael simply repeated, "I need the police. They'll understand when they get here." By the time officers arrived, Michael was sitting on the front steps of his house, his hands resting on his knees. The gun was still inside, untouched since he had placed it on the counter. "Put your hands where we can see them," an officer shouted, his weapon drawn. Michael complied without hesitation, raising his hands in the air. He offered no resistance as they handcuffed him, his face expressionless. Inside the house, first responders were met with a grisly scene. Julia and Lisa's bodies were found in the bedroom, the blood-soaked bed and floor painting a vivid picture of what had transpired. The officers who entered the home later described the atmosphere as haunting, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood and the silence almost suffocating. Neighbors stood on their lawns, whispering among themselves as Michael was escorted to the squad car. Some described him as calm and detached, while others swore they saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. As the car pulled away, the once quiet street was left in shock. What had seemed like an ordinary afternoon had turned into a scene of unspeakable violence. The community, still reeling, would spend weeks speculating about what had driven Michael to such a breaking point. The answers, as investigators would soon learn, were as complex as the emotions that had led to that fateful afternoon. If you are not an advocate of domestic violence, murder, workplace harassment, child abuse, infidelity, to mention a few, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more true crime stories. Thank you. The day of Michael's arrest marked the beginning of a lengthy and highly publicized legal battle. As he was led out of his home in handcuffs, reporters had already begun gathering, their cameras capturing every moment of his stoic demeanor. The quiet suburban neighborhood, once a picture of tranquility, had become a hub of media frenzy. From the very start, Michael's defense team faced an uphill battle. The evidence against him was overwhelming: 2 bodies, a gun registered in his name, and his own 911 call admitting to the shooting. But they were determined to construct a narrative that painted Michael not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a man driven to the edge by extraordinary circumstances. At the arraignment, Michael's defense attorney entered a plea of not guilty by reason of temporary insanity. This plea, while controversial, was their best shot at avoiding a first-degree murder conviction. The argument was simple. In the heat of the moment, upon discovering his wife in the arms of another, Michael experienced a psychological break that rendered him incapable of rational thought or control. This was not a man who lost control, the prosecutor declared during their opening statement. This was a man who knew exactly what he was going to do the moment he stepped into that house. They called witnesses to the stand. including neighbors who described hearing the gunshots and seeing Michael calmly waiting on the porch afterward. One neighbor testified, "He didn't look panicked or remorseful. He looked empty, like he had already accepted what he'd done." Michael himself took the stand. Dressed in a simple suit, his face pale and drawn, he spoke in a voice that wavered with emotion. "I didn't go into that house planning to hurt anyone," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I just wanted answers. I wanted to understand why she would do this to me. But when I saw them together, everything inside me just broke. I don't even remember pulling the trigger. It's like it wasn't me. It was this rage, this pain, that took over." The courtroom was silent as Michael recounted the events of that day. Some jurors appeared visibly moved, while others remained stoic, their expressions unreadable. The prosecution, however, was quick to challenge Michael's testimony. During cross-examination, they pressed him on his actions leading up to the shooting, suggesting that his decision to come home early was premeditated. "You suspected the affair, didn't you?" the prosecutor asked. "You came home that day expecting to catch them, didn't you?" Michael hesitated before answering. "I had my suspicions," he admitted, "but I didn't know for sure. I didn't know I would react the way I did." The jury deliberated for 3 days, their decision weighed down by the complexity of the case. When they finally returned to the courtroom, the tension was palpable. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Michael Harris, guilty of voluntary manslaughter." The verdict was a compromise, reflecting the jury's belief that while Michael's actions were not premeditated, they were still criminal. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years for good behavior. This story is one that stirs powerful emotions and difficult questions, leaving us to grapple with the complexities of human behavior. As we reflect on the events surrounding Michael, Julia, and Lisa, let's delve deeper into the questions that linger in the minds of everyone following the case. What would you do if you were in Michael's shoes? Imagine discovering the person you love most in a moment of ultimate betrayal. Could you walk away? Or would the emotional weight of that moment drive you to act without thought? These are questions that spark debate, as there are no easy answers. Looking beyond this case, we find that crimes of passion are not as uncommon as we might hope. According to the Bureau of Justice statistics, nearly 30% of homicides in the U.S. are classified as crimes of passion, often involving romantic partners. These cases are marked by intense emotions, jealousy, betrayal, anger, that drive individuals to commit acts they might never have considered in a calmer state. One case that bears striking similarities to Michael's is the infamous story of Clara Harris, a dentist who discovered her husband's infidelity and, in a moment of rage, ran him over with her car. Like Michael, Clara's actions were both shocking and deeply human, an eruption of pain that led to irreversible consequences. But the question remains, can betrayal ever justify violence? While many may sympathize with the pain Michael felt in that moment, others argue that no betrayal, no matter how devastating, can excuse taking a life. After all, Julia and Lisa were human beings with families, dreams, and futures that were cut short. As we unravel stories like this, we invite you, the viewer, to engage with these complex questions. What does justice look like in a case like this? Should the focus be on punishment, understanding, or prevention? And what can we learn from these tragedies to ensure they don't happen again? The answers may not be clear, but the conversation is crucial. Your voice matters in unpacking these difficult truths and finding meaning in stories that, while painful, remind us of the fragility and complexity of the human experience. Once again, if you are not an advocate of domestic violence, murder, workplace harassment, child abuse, to mention a few, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications for more true crime stories. Thank you.